Well, you said earlier that we exercise our rights because, they're infantile. So at what point do they exercise their own rights?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. So,
Yeah.
basically, every legal society that I've ever studied, which is a lot, they all have what's commonly referred to as an age of majority. And so the age of majority has changed. Like, for instance, in our own society, the age of majority used to be 21. And now the age of majority is 18. So when you're 18, you can exercise your legal rights, you can exercise your lawful rights, you can get into contracts, you can be held liable for contracts. And that's basically the age of majority, is like when you reach the age where you can enter into contracts and be held liable for contracts, then you're in the age of what they call the age of majority. So by the time that you have reached your age of majority, that's when you can start exercising your rights. Because since we've talked about this word property so much this evening, one thing to note is that your rights are your property. You can buy, sell, trade them. People do this every day in the legal society. They're called lawyers and judges. And people do this every day with their own rights. Okay, you can buy, sell, trade your own rights. You can sell it or trade it for, say, US citizenship, right? You could sell it or trade it to let somebody do things that you wouldn't normally let do to you. So there are ways of contracting into giving up your own rights. So by the time you hit the age of majority, that's when you can exercise those rights. That's when you have the right to own property.
So go over a little bit of what's been happening with this whole COVID-19 thing, and where they're saying that you don't need your parents' consent to get a vaccination.
Well, first of all, that's completely unlawful. And my personal opinion is they're only doing it because they're trying to vaccinate everybody. And, not to sound too much of a conspiracy theorist, but I think the NWO is starting to take over. You know what I mean?
And also interesting tiny point on that, the age of majority, if you consider during Donald Trump's term as president of the United States, you heard a lot coming from the opposition side, politically speaking, about we should lower the age for voting to 16. And I don't think there's a single adult or grown man or woman in this country, anyway, that believes 16-year-olds are intellectually equipped to make decisions like that. And we all know the government does not have confidence in 16-year-olds. They just want to allow that window open right up, because when you're the age of majority, or you have the age of to exercise your rights, you are also right within their jurisdiction. You're there to apply for their benefit, putting you right into their control. So all they're doing is undermining the man or woman that created that child, that offspring.
And even talking about that, I actually, think 18 is kind of too young to exercise
Yeah.
age of majority. And another thing that I know that they use, where you don't have to have parental consent, where the quote unquote child can exercise their own rights besides getting vaccinated with the C-bomb vaccine,
Yeah.
is if the child wishes to have a sex change,
Yes.
and at least one
Horrible.
parent agrees, yeah, then the other parent doesn't even have a say. And I think that that's pretty, because I don't think a child should be allowed to make that decision before they've
No.
reached the age of majority, because there's a lot of children who are going through a lot of hormonal changes when they're young, especially, being raised from a child to a man or to a woman. You're going through a lot of hormonal changes in those years. And,
Yep.
typically teenagers are very confused about the world, their role in it. They're very curious about sexes and, why they are the way they are. So I just think it's, it's too dangerous to allow them to make life-altering decisions like that. We don't allow
Yeah.
anyone under the age of 18 to get tattoos, to have credit cards, like all the other stuff. But you can change your sex or get a COVID vaccine. That's insane.
In fact, in Oregon, I believe, I think at age 15, if I'm not mistaken, a minor at age of 15 can go into a state-funded clinic and start on hormones, and that's even without any sort of therapy or psychological counseling either, even though that's gone to crap. But just that idea that your offspring at the age beginning high school could begin to make physical, irreversible changes, and you, legally speaking, have no right to even know about it, is appalling, And by definition, teenager, I believe in Webster's, says confused SOB. If you're not confused and you don't know what the hell's going on, you're not emotional, then there's something wrong with you. There's probably something to be looked at if you're quote unquote normal and stable. If you're not at least a little bit scattered, then something's not changing the way it should. But this state predatory behavior acting on the offspring of man and woman is evil beyond bounds, because I don't think any man or woman that's acting in the capacity of politician truly believes that these youth should be just freed without their parental, blessings. Yet they're doing it anyway because there's a greater agenda at hand. So I've heard.
So
Well, that could just be crazy conspiracy theory stuff. Sorry, Oracle.
It could be.
So when we talk about the age of majority or the age of accountability, so here's what's interesting, and I'm just going to throw this in the mix. As a therapist, we look at the formation of not only the physical body, but how the brain forms. And when neuroscientists, and it's already been proven that the brain of a male or female, we'll say. So the female brain actually grows a little faster than that of a male. So what they say is, for a brain to be fully mature, for a male is usually around 30, a female around 26. But here's the big but: if there has been trauma, and who has not had trauma? If there's been trauma, abuse, then you have what's called arrested development. And what that means is the chemicals that are supposed to wash the brain in the early formation of the brain, even into the early teens and tweens, that stops occurring under stress and trauma, because adrenaline takes over, and then a child is full of anxiety and stress and adrenaline, and it stops the other chemicals from washing the brain what it needs. Now, all that to say this: when we have a man or woman who behaves like a child and they don't grasp the consequences of their behavior, immediately it is known that the brain has not been sufficiently washed as a child or as a preteen. And so that stops the ability of children to have and know consequences to their behavior, and they'll continually act out of the trauma or out of what they've seen or out of a lot of emotion. And so that's why that whole age of, it's debatable, because, everyone grows at different levels of maturity, and it's certainly based on the family of origin and or what's been thrown into the mix that caused trauma in that family, and how that child, while he or she is going through a trauma or an abuse, how they perceive it in their mind, their brain, their heart. And that is also important to know, because arrested development is, let's say at the age of 6 you're molested. Many times you can physically grow up, and then when you're in a situation where is actually dangerous or perceived to be, then you usually turn back to being a 6-year-old, because that's where the arrested development occurred, and you can't make all the correct decisions you would if you were, 35 and a true adult.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting, Oracle. I'm curious what your personal sort of observation is, because I think the majority of society anyway could quite clearly see the sort of infantilized behavior of this generation coming up, and this woe is me kind of attitude that seems to be in large part most of the generation. Do you think that is in any way connected to what you just described, or do you think it's mostly social, a behavior that's trending, I guess you?
Well, it's kind of interesting, what came first, the chicken or the egg, and I think, first of all, it has to do with, in the womb, how much stress mama has had to endure. Like if she was in an abusive relationship, that child is washed in tremendous amount of adrenaline, and the baby comes out many times. Now, this is not the only, reason, but they'll come out colicky, or they suck their thumb into the age of 6 or 7. They're always looking for comfort, because if things happened in the environment. So then, to answer your question, it's kind of a hard question, because everything is included in what forms us, and it also is included in how we perceive what's happening to us. I mean, here's the interesting thing: you're a grown man or woman. You can walk into a restaurant, and then 90% of the people turn around and look at you, and then somebody has like kind of a nasty face, and then you look down, you're like, oh my gosh, is my zipper open? Or I knew I shouldn't have wore this outfit. You start, kind of thinking, okay, not everybody, but some people, like, okay, what's going on? Or do I look terrible? Or did I, what's happening here? Why are people staring at me? And you can go into a panic attack or feel very self-conscious, or some people are just, who cares, So a lot of it depends on how you're perceiving the world and what has happened to you in your formative ages and stages of growing up. So when we talk about where people are kind of at right now, and every generational has its own issues, for sure. But when we talk about, what was the word that you used? Was it immaturity or culture?
They've been infantilized. They've been infantilized and sort of, in a way, babied to the point of, that's what they, almost as though that's what they are pursuing, continually treated that way.
So that's a complicated answer, and there's not one answer to it, because, again, it has to do with how they were raised. I think that we've got a culture right now where kids are very, very much influenced by so much of what goes on in social media, so much of, what's going on in sports and in, and in music industry. And it gives the illusion that life is easier than it is, because, when you're younger, you can seem to rise to fame and fortune. It doesn't matter if you went through any satanic ritual to get there or what happened, whether that happened or not. But it looks like it's been an easy ride to be able to get a young person to where they're at. And it gives the illusion that, this is, if I just do this or sing this song or, do this, I'll be able to be just as famous or as wealthy. And it's such a lie, because I worked in advertising for years and years in New York City, and I finally had to get out of marketing and advertising because the lies that was fed the public was so disgraceful in all the corporate offices. They knew exactly what they're doing. They know the illusion. They know what they want people to think and the subliminal messages. It was disgraceful, and I had to get out of it. And believe me when I tell you, I was making a tremendous, there's a lot of money you can make in brainwashing people and persuading them to eat a certain food or a certain drink. So I obviously had to get out of that. But we still
But
have that going on today, and it's very persuasive and it's very seductive, and it absolutely gives the wrong message. And when the brain is still forming, and who doesn't want an easier life? And especially kids and children, they want their own way repeatedly. That's what they want until they grow up mature and have self-discipline, which is hard. It's very hard. It's hard for adults, and part of it is because what's going on in their mind, their thoughts, their their expectations, their knee-jerk reaction to life. I say that everyone is very simple because there's nothing new under the sun. But we're very complex in the way we got to where we are. But believe me, people are very predictable. And if everyone could just kind of listen to their thoughts, think about the consequences. Don't only think about yourself of where that's in. And because a lot of brains have not been formed correctly, and that includes, we could say fluoride and chemicals and now GMOs. All of that is also creating tremendous amount of issues with the thinking ability that God gave us to be able to, grow up, mature, make right decisions. So it's a multi-dimensional, complex issue that it's very individual, but it's actually pretty simple.
I'll say this, like some of the biggest factors that I kind of see adding to that, and after I say this, we'll open up the board for questions. But some of the biggest factors are like, let's talk about the age of majority. Yeah, the age of majority is 18. But if you look at most middle class families, where their children are going to college and they're going to go to college for 4 years, really their age of majority is 22. Because until they get out of college, unless they're, paying their way, taking care of all of their stuff, and they're an incredibly responsible individual, until they get out of college, they're really coming under the jurisdiction of mom and dad. And let's just say that they're still like doing all of that stuff, like mom and dad, like, my parents didn't pay for my brother or sister's college or any college that I kind of went to randomly, all the way. They had to have a job, they had to be doing stuff, they had to produce certain things for my parents to say, okay, we'll supplement this other stuff that you wish and require for life. So even though they were out on their own, they still had that kind of tether to the sovereign that created them, to where it's like, if something big happened, or they really needed some type of financial thing pretty quickly, like my brother, one of the things he did when he graduated college was a couple of his friends were going to Europe all summer to travel through Europe, and it was going to be a couple more $1,000s than he had. And he asked my parents for the money, and of course, they ended up giving it to him on the condition that he never brought up the fact again that they made him mulch the yard for his 18th birthday. Because he'd bring that up at social, like family meetings, like Christmas, Thanksgiving, stuff like that. And of course they agreed, and he kept to his word and they kept to theirs. So, but again, it's like when you start looking at the age of majority, it doesn't affect everybody in our society the same way as it does, or as it did back in the day. So that's kind of one thing to think about. And another thing with kind of the question that you were answering, and just something I didn't really hear you state when you were answering that, but it's that a lot of parents coddle their children these days. So, and you probably haven't seen that quite as much as I have, uh, uh, Joni, but or Oracle, sorry. But a lot of parents are very, very coddling of their children. They're very, very overprotective. And I think there's a lot that goes into that. And that is, the kind of fear porn that the media plays all the time. I think it's just the fact that we've all ran into stupid people. We've all seen dumb things done. And I also think it's the fact that, we have gotten to such a production in our society that they can do that. Like back when I was a child, every parent worked, they were gone all day long, and everybody got together for dinner, and from dinner on it was basically like family time. And now you don't really have that, and you have the electronic babysitter. And like Monarch and I were actually joking about this right before the call, like, because CPS got called on him for having a home birth. And it's like, well, what's so bad about that? He was talking about their policy is that if any child was born outside of the hospital, they're supposed to go into the NICU. And just as a joke, I was like, you mean they weren't born in the bubble? Somebody quick, grab a history book and see what we do if they weren't born in a bubble.
Yep.
And I just think there's a lot of that mentality going on, and it's not really good. One thing is that mentality, kind of like what you were talking about with the advertising industry, it's not that they just know and they don't care. It's that they are actively pursuing, those negative characteristics of trying to get people to buy their product by any means necessary. And now, unlike when you were probably working there, now they have the power of neuroscience to help them
Yep.
with that. So they can literally hook up like EEGs, check out the way your brain is firing magnetically, and then put things in front of you to see what your brain's actual reactions are, because that's so much more important than what your physical reactions are, because you're only physically reacting to about 3% of the information that your brain is interpreting. So,
Exactly. Mhm.
any,
I think
anyways, with that, I would like to open up the board to anybody who has a question or wishes to join the conversation for a moment. It appears that Sarah has been able to be the administrator, so I'm not the administrator right now. Anyways, if anybody raises their hand, and we're just going to continue talking. So I don't know who was first, Monarch or Oracle, but one of y'all were about to talk.
I was just going to say, quick point before Sarah probably goes up, or whoever that is with their hand. But I think another pretty impactful difference with the rearing of the offspring now is when, say, you and I were young, the norm was to be dropped in some mysterious daycare or something of that sort. Whereas nowadays, now that we're grown and we have our own offspring, that kind of plays into the whole desire to coddle the kids or make sure that doesn't happen, along with the actual ability to have one or both parents more present nowadays.
Well, and I would kind of agree with that and then disagree at the same time. I know so many people who, like the maternity leave here in the United States is, I think, 3 months, and most of the rest of the world, it's typically minimum 6 months. And a lot of parents take a couple of years off to raise their child, and those first 6 years are incredibly important. The Catholic Church used to say, "Give us your son or your daughter until they're 6 years old, and we'll tell you what type of man or woman they'll be." And that's incredibly uh, true. You can prove it with psychology. We can basically prove that today. But everything about your personality and who you are is going to be fully integrated into your body by the time you're 6 years old. And then it's just going to mature and either be positive or negative with the choices you make in life.